But I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going.
When the demand for truth is branded as boring in the past week, former President Donald Trump publicly dismissed renewed questions about the long-concealed Jeffrey Epstein files as pretty boring stuff. His remarks, delivered in an interview that has since gone viral, marked a remarkable pivot for a politician who once vowed to drain the swamp and expose elite wrongdoing. I don't understand why it keeps going, Trump said, shifting uneasily as cameras rolled. I think only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going. It was a stunning moment, not only for its blunt contempt toward public scrutiny, but also for the setting. As Trump downplayed the significance of the Epstein scandal, the man standing next to him laughed quietly. That man was Howard Lutnick, a financier whose Manhattan property records show he acquired an Epstein-linked townhouse previously owned by Lex Wexner, Epstein's longtime associate and benefactor. For millions of Americans, the Epstein saga is not boring. It is an open wound. At the heart of it lies a network of influence and exploitation that authorities have never fully explained. Epstein's death in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 did not resolve the case. It magnified suspicions that the world's most powerful figures were shielded from accountability.
A contradictory narrative in the interview, Trump insisted that credible records about Epstein had already been released, though he also claimed that many files were invented by Democrats and former FBI Director James Comey. He offered no evidence to support those claims. Instead, he suggested it was up to his former Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to decide whether anything further should be disclosed. Observers noted the rhetorical sleight of hand, simultaneously denying the file's relevance, questioning their authenticity, and deflecting responsibility for their suppression. As one critic summarized on social media,
"Release the files. We have the files. We will release the files. Wait, where are the files? We don't have the files. These files are made up. These files are too boring. Why are we talking about this?" The inconsistency would be almost comical were the underlying crimes not so serious. Ghislaine Maxwell remains imprisoned for sex trafficking minors to clients who have never been publicly named. Federal prosecutors have kept the vast majority of records sealed. Public reaction, outrage without illusion reaction to Trump's remarks has been swift and visceral. Across platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Reddit, Americans voiced disgust. "The gaslighting is just insane," one commenter wrote. "They are literally telling us protecting children is too boring to bother with." Another summed up the sentiment in more caustic terms. "Imagine electing swamp creatures because they said they'd drain their habitat." Some framed it as a grim milestone in America's political cynicism. "They know how powerless and pacified we are," another commenter observed. "Trump could say he is on the list and show us proof, and most people would just post about it at work. They won." The sense of betrayal transcends partisanship. While Trump was hardly the only political figure to court Epstein's circle, he built much of his brand on promising to expose exactly this kind of elite impunity. Now, faced with demands to prove it, he dismisses the interest as manufactured hysteria.
The real stakes there is a long-documented record that shows Epstein was enabled by powerful people across decades and party lines. In 2008, he secured an unprecedented non-prosecution deal, negotiated by then-prosecutor Alex Acosta, later Trump's labor secretary. In 2019, Epstein died under suspicious circumstances in federal custody, prompting a wave of conspiracy theories. Yet in the years since, successive administrations have failed to provide the transparency that victims and their advocates demand. Periodic congressional attempts to force disclosure of unredacted records have been blocked or delayed, often by Republicans who once championed full accountability. Critics say this pattern, promise disclosure, then retreat behind excuses, is designed to exhaust the public's attention. As one observer put it, when exposing a crime is treated as committing a crime, you're being ruled by criminals. The larger question beyond the spectacle, the larger question is whether Americans are willing to tolerate this level of evasion. If the most grotesque crimes can be waved away as boring, what does that say about the moral core of American institutions? Some analysts suspect the only way the full truth will ever emerge is through a leak or a whistleblower. As the past decade has shown, official channels have proven adept at promising accountability in principle, but delivering nothing in practice. The Epstein scandal, once the ultimate symbol of bipartisan corruption, is now being reframed by some of its most prominent critics as a tedious sideshow. For those who still care about the victims, it is a reminder that when power closes ranks, the first casualty is always memory. Conclusion for now, the Epstein files remain sealed. The cameras have moved on, but the questions and the anger have not disappeared. If anything, they are growing. And as one voice remarked in exasperation, "If this doesn't wake Americans up, I don't know what will." The culture of evasion, inside America's reluctance to confront the Epstein legacy in the summer of 2019, the death of Jeffrey Epstein in a Manhattan jail cell became an epoch-defining scandal. For a brief moment, it appeared that decades of whispered rumors and sealed documents might finally be forced into the open. But in the 5 years since, the Epstein case has been steadily buried under a fog of deflection, half-truths, and a calculated fatigue designed to make the public stop asking questions. This month, Donald Trump added another layer of obfuscation, dismissing the renewed scrutiny as pretty boring stuff, implying that only bad people and fake news still care. It was an extraordinary declaration, not only because of the subject matter, America's most notorious child sex trafficker, but because of how openly it revealed the establishment's contempt for accountability.
Layers of denial since 2019, the narrative around Epstein's files has mutated in surreal ways. First, officials insisted the records were incomplete. Then, they were classified. Later, they were said to have been fabricated by Democrats or the so-called deep state. Now, we are told they are too dull to merit further release. The contradictions are not accidental. They reflect a deliberate strategy, create enough confusion and contradictory messaging that the public cannot sustain a coherent demand for truth. Consider Trump's own timeline. During his presidency, he promised to disclose everything about Epstein's network, including who benefited from his crimes. Yet when pressed last week, he claimed he didn't understand the interest. A moment later, he insisted the credible files had already been given to the public, a claim that has never been substantiated. When asked why the remaining files could not be released, he deflected again, this time invoking his former Attorney General Pam Bondi. Bondi, for her part, told reporters that she would defer to the memo, an opaque reference to an internal communication never made public. If the strategy sounds familiar, that's because it is. From Watergate to Iran-Contra to the 2008 financial crisis, American institutions have repeatedly relied on this playbook: appear contrite, promise transparency, then do everything possible to ensure accountability never arrives.
Compounding the outrage was the presence of Howard Lutnick standing beside Trump during the remarks. Property records confirm Lutnick acquired Epstein's former Manhattan townhouse, previously owned by Les Wexner, whose own financial entanglements with Epstein have been extensively documented in court filings and investigative reporting. As Trump belittled the scandal, Lutnick smirked. For many watching, the moment encapsulated the entire spectacle: powerful men, insulated by money and connections, dismissing public concern as hysteria. The reaction online was ferocious. Commenters described the image as pure evil, a gaslighting performance, and a chilling demonstration of how effortlessly the elite can trivialize crimes that destroyed hundreds of lives. A system designed to protect itself. The Epstein saga is often treated as an anomaly, but the structural dynamics are not unique. It is not difficult to see the same patterns repeated across institutions: an initial wave of horror and outrage, followed by procedural slow-walking, political blame-shifting, and finally, a collective shrug. Some observers believe this gradual normalization of impunity is the most dangerous legacy of the Epstein case. If a conspiracy involving the sexual exploitation of minors can be diluted into boring stuff, what else can be made to disappear? In 2020, a trove of court records confirmed that Epstein maintained contact with ex-presidents, billionaires, prime ministers, and Hollywood moguls. A partial visitor log from his Palm Beach estate and Manhattan townhouse listed names that once would have triggered congressional hearings. Yet most of those records remain sealed under the pretext of protecting privacy or preserving ongoing investigations. At each step, the justification shifts, but the outcome remains unchanged. Nothing is disclosed.
Why this matters at its core, the Epstein case is not merely about one predator. It is about the machinery that protected him. The non-prosecution deal brokered in 2008 by Alex Acosta, who would later serve as Trump's labor secretary, was itself a scandal of historic proportions. Acosta's agreement immunized Epstein's unnamed co-conspirators, effectively shielding a network whose full extent remains hidden. Years later, the public was told the system had learned its lesson. But when Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of sex trafficking, federal prosecutors refused to reveal whom she trafficked children to. Maxwell's sentence was treated as a final chapter rather than the prologue it should have been. The message is unmistakable. The system is not designed to pursue the truth if the truth implicates too many powerful people. Public reaction, anger, and resignation. The online backlash to Trump's comments has been unusually unified across ideological lines. Even conservatives who once defended him expressed revulsion. One observer summed up the mood: imagine electing swamp creatures because they said they'd drain their habitat. Others voiced a darker cynicism: they know how powerless we are. He could stand there, admit everything, and nothing would happen. The despair is not unwarranted. For years, elected officials have feigned outrage, called for investigations, and then voted to bury the evidence. In a recent congressional vote, an amendment requiring the release of Epstein's files was defeated without explanation. What comes next if there is a chance the truth will emerge? It likely will not come from official channels. As in past eras, the real disclosures may depend on whistleblowers, leakers, or independent journalists willing to risk everything. Yet the public has a role, too. The longer people allow themselves to be told that child sex trafficking is boring, the easier it will be for future predators to operate in the shadows. In an era saturated with distraction, outrage fatigue, and algorithmic manipulation, this is perhaps the most important lesson of the Epstein case. The greatest asset of the powerful is not merely their money. It is our willingness to look away. Conclusion: Trump's dismissal of the scandal as uninteresting may have been intended as an exit ramp, a way to signal to supporters that it's time to move on. But if history is any guide, the more that officials insist there is nothing to see here, the more determined the public must be to look closer. The files remain sealed. The network remains intact. And the children Epstein harmed remain the final, silent witnesses to a crime too vast to fit inside any convenient narrative. The question is whether Americans are willing to accept that silence, or whether this time they will demand more.